Today we had our fourth class in the Getting Things Done course, and the class was on a new public management to get things done. We discussed the fact that in the 1960s and the 1970s, many observers were saying that classic bureaucratic structures weren't working terribly well in Western countries to deliver the services that people wanted. The expansion of the state, the increased demand of people for services, had really stretched where these bureaucracies were, and you had a lot of other ideas emerging about making government work better. You had ideas coming from people like Herbert Simon that were criticizing classical administrative theory and saying these guys say that they're scientific, but actually most of their principles are really just proverbs. You had people from the perspective of public choice theory coming out and saying, look, we need to really understand the motives of individuals in the bureaucracy and individuals in the political realm, and think about government as a market, and think about the way incentives matter. And some basic theories about behavior really took hold: the budget maximizing bureaucrat, the median voter, etc., to help us understand things a little bit better. You had new public administration coming out and saying, look, these strong bureaucracies are actually not serving people very well, and there's a danger that they are not representative and that they don't provide good equity. You had the human relations school saying, the classical theorists didn't really pay attention to how people think and how they behave and how they really get motivated. And we need to actually make some adjustments to take those issues into consideration more seriously. You had other approaches that emerged at the time about policy analysis and the way that policy needs to be analyzed and the kinds of tools that need to be employed, which impacted who you hire and how you hire them, etc., etc. Out of this emerged a really large toolbox of potential ideas and potential interventions in states to try and make them work better. We saw the advent of privatization, of contracting out, of performance metrics being used in the public sector. We saw efforts to decentralize and to bring government closer to the people. We saw efforts to streamline and cut the size of the public sector, with the idea that maybe you don't need as many people and you can use technology to fill some of the gaps. Many of these different things were put together into mishmash type of reforms and called new public management. And the point that I was trying to make is, new public management didn't emerge as kind of like a theory of bureaucracy, in the sense that you had someone like Weber putting all of these things together and saying, this makes a whole. Rather, it's kind of like a puzzle that it's hard to work out what the final picture actually looks like. But you can identify a lot of constituent elements. So I said to people, I think this tells us that we have a much bigger toolbox than we had in the period where we're thinking just about classical administrative theory. We don't have to say, well, what does an ideal bureaucracy look like? We can say, well, do we want a bureaucracy, or do we want to have a flatter organization? Do we want to have an organization that's more decentralized? Do we want to have more choice? Do we want to use incentives and create more of a market-based type approach? This is where charter schools came in, the use of vouchers. These are very interesting mechanisms, and they give us a much more expanded toolbox. The question then is, which tools do we use where to make governments work better? I made the point that, a lot of these tools have been put together in places, and you have to wonder how well they actually work to achieve what people want to do. That the same idea came about in 2 or 3 different theories for different reasons. So, for instance, in public choice theory, there are people who advocate decentralizing and even contracting things out of the public service. And the reason why is that they want to bring consumers closer to government. And they think that that's the way that you create the right incentives, and that's how your control mechanisms work. The new public administration people also suggested introducing decentralized systems, but it was because they wanted government to be closer to citizens, to give citizens more power. So you have the public choice people talking about consumers and the state, and you have the new public administration people speaking about citizens in the state. Both of them say let's bring them closer together, but very, very different ideas as to why and what your government looks like. So we see all of these different mechanisms: privatization, contracting out, use of performance measurements. And the question is, how well do they work? Where have they taken us to? And in the next couple of sessions, we're going to ask exactly those questions. We're going to look at the use of performance metrics and then the use of the concessions arrangements in Mexico. And specifically in relation to the development sphere, we're going to ask, are there any prerequisites to make these things work? And are there any mechanisms or any things that we need to think about to give ourselves the best chance of success? We're not suggesting that this is an antidote to anything, but more kind of thinking about, well, how does this expand our toolbox, and how do we think about that as a way to get things done in development more often and more effectively? Thanks.